first Wednesday of the month, which means we have a share on step 10, which Alan's kindly come along to relay his experience around that step, or however long he feels comfortable. So I'll hand the meeting over to Alan.
Wonderful.
Cheers.
Hi guys, my name's Alan and I'm a recovered drug addict.
Hello, Alan.
And it's nice to be here. It's nice to be anywhere, if I'm honest. It's nice to see you lot, and it's nice to be seen. And me and Rob were talking about it. I forgot that this was a big book study, that I'd never been here since it'd been started, and that I was sharing on step 10. So all of that was a nice surprise. And I mean, guys, I've got to say, the way you got this meeting laid out, this is intense. This is like hardcore frontline big book studying. It's like speed dating big book studying. With you all, I was saying to Toby, I mean, Toby's a good friend of mine, and I wouldn't want to be that close to him or anyone. So, I mean, just hats off to you. I've got to say, it's great to sit in a meeting of Cocaine Anonymous and see books, see big books. When I first came into the fellowship, my first home group was the Tuesday night Big Book Audio, which at that time used to be in St Swithin's. And the first few years of my recovery, you would not see me without a book in my hand. You just wouldn't. It was such a fundamental part of my recovery, and of moving me from being in recovery to being recovered. And for me, it's just a book. It's just experience. There's nothing mystical or magical about it. It's the experience of people that come before me that's been passed down to share. But it was so important. So it's really cool to see books around, even though all of you have brought your books tonight because you forgot some numpty was coming to share and spoil your bloody big book meeting. So there you go. So one of the first things that was passed on to me when I came into recovery, my sobriety date's 3rd of the 3rd, 2003. So I'm a little over 13 years down the line. And the principles that I was taught and that I learned in my first 13 days have remained the same at 13 years. This idea for me, this idea that things change, that they get easy, that time and sobriety and length of sobriety actually means anything, is bullshit for me. I am just as capable of making one or two really bad decisions and throwing it all away now as I was then. And because I know that, and because I understand that, the principles have remained the same. And the principles of the steps and the working and reworking of the steps out of the big book have remained the same. So one of the things that I was taught early on, I was lucky enough. I've said it many times before, the first guy to sponsor me, he was in AA. We had CA in Bournemouth then, and it was starting to kick off. But this guy was in CA, and he came from Manchester. Not that I got anything against anybody who comes from Manchester. I'm sure it's a great place. And he looked like, if you can try and picture him, if you imagine Death, the guy with the sigh, with his coat off, this is what this guy looked like to me. He was tall, he was big, he was skinny, and he was the most miserable looking bastard I've ever set my eyes on. But what this guy had is he had the absolute ability to tell me the truth. He had the absolute ability to say, I don't really care what your opinion is or what your view is about this, that and the other. How about we work through the steps together, we work through the big book together, we get a spiritual awakening together, and then I'll listen to your opinion and your view on it. Offended me somewhat, but nevertheless I rolled with it. And one of the things he told me, he said, one of the first things I'd like you to take on board is, whatever you do in your journey through recovery, don't let anybody else ever read your big book for you. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, you're going to come across lots of people on your journey who will have their views and their opinions of 12-step recovery, of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and their interpretation of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said it's really, really important. This is not a one-size-fits-all general purpose recovery program. This is about you getting an individual personal relationship of a God of your understanding. And that means that you are going to have to take responsibility for your recovery. That you are going to have to take responsibility to start reading the Big Book, to start studying the Big Book, to start working and reworking the steps the way you are able to do it at any point, not the way somebody said they did 5 years ago. There was a couple of old boys, a couple of AA boys who, they were called Joe and Charlie, and they travelled all around America and England. They came to England a few times, and they used to do big book studies. And this was when it was all on tapes. I mean, they started it probably in the 70s. And if you've never listened to Joe and Charlie Big Book Studies, trust me, guys, there's some really, really cool stuff in there, and quite good to get you, or for me to get me, into the book. And they told this story about, so this guy had went to his sponsor and he'd said, "Do you know what, I'm having real trouble in my sex life. I'm having real problems getting a woman. No matter what I do, I can't seem to get a woman. I'm looking everywhere and I can't get a woman. It's frustrating. It's really getting me. And I don't know what to do." Now, his sponsor knew that generally speaking, we can turn to the Big Book for most areas in our lives, and especially the two biggies, sex and checks, the honey and the money. If it's to do with them two, the Big Book's always a good reference point. Now, Bill Wilson, and I believe he did this deliberately, he famously put the sex inventory stuff in the Big Book on page 69. I refuse to believe that was coincidence. Now, this good old sponsor boy, he'd heard that at some point, in page 69, yeah. So when the sponsor went to him, the good old sponsor boy, who was getting on a few years and marbles were probably a bit rusty, went, "What you need to do is go to the Big Book. The answer's in the Big Book." What he said is, "I want you to go to your Big Book, I want you to open it, and I want you to read page 96. And the sponsor went, "All right, page 96, all right, cool, I'll do that." And off he went. And he went back home and he got his trusty Big Book. He probably put his glasses on as well. And he went to page 96 and he read, "Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you have to offer." And it really underlined, it can be easy to quote page numbers. It can be easy to say, the book says this, the book says that. But unless you put in the effort to study the book, to read the book, to start to soak in what's really in between the pages of this book, it can be so easily be misinterpreted. I used to hear it again and again. Find someone who's armed with the facts. Find someone who's armed with the facts. I heard that for years until I finally heard someone say, about themselves. It's not about finding someone who just has the facts that are in this book. It's about finding someone who has the facts about themselves, who's had a spiritual awakening as a result of working and reworking the 12 steps out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it leaves me sat here surrounded by books and surrounded by people who clearly do that, because that's what we come to Big Book study meetings for. There are times where I've thought I wish every single meeting in CA was a big book meeting. I really do, because that's what gave me and continues to give me the ability to go out there and deal with the rest of that. The instructions, directions, suggestions, whatever you want to call them in this book. And my home group's changed now. I'm at Ringwood on a Thursday night. Anybody that wants to come out there, please come out. It'd be great to see you. We will give you a cup of tea. Not as good as the cup of tea I got tonight, but we'll try and make a cup of tea and we'll try and chuck some biscuits your way. What I do, because I haven't got a big book study home group anymore, is I make it my business to hook up with people every month. And we look at this stuff and we still go through this stuff. And I still do that a little over 13 years down the line. Because remember what I said, 13 years, 13 minutes, it makes no difference. The only person in this room that 13 years of sobriety is really important to is me. And that's it. Because what I've had is I've had the life that living this program has given me. So I get my sponsor, and miserable old git that he is, he starts giving me some suggestions. I didn't listen to them initially to start with, so he said, I'll tell you what, we'll work on directions for now then, shall we? And if you're up for doing this, we'll do this. And if you're not, you're very welcome to piss off and go and find someone else. And I said I would very much like to do what you're telling me to do. And I got on with it. And I worked through the steps. For me, the initial working through the 12-step process was probably about a month, a bit less than a month. And it needed to be. I've spoke to people who've spent a year working through the steps. And I've spoke to people who've worked through the steps in a day. From a personal point of view, I couldn't care less how long anybody works through the steps. What I care about is that we work through the steps. Because what I discovered after that first month is that wasn't the end of the journey. That was the beginning of the journey. That was where it all started. So I'd had the initial introduction to the steps. And I'd got up around step 9 and I'd started to have... You talked about these promises. And I didn't realise originally where the promises sit in the book. But when I got to about step 9, things started happening. Things started improving. And there was a real... I wonder why I'm kind of feeling all right. I wonder why for the last couple of days I've went to bed and I've slept all the way through the night, which I hadn't done for donkey's years. I wondered why I wasn't so twitchy all the time. And honestly, there was a little while, it was a little while down the line before the penny dropped that it was a result of working the steps. So I started working through the steps and we went through the 1, 2, 3 process, and we got on our knees and we prayed together, and that was really cool. And we did the inventory thing, and I don't know how it is nowadays when you're going through that process to start with, but I know that when I was initially going through the process, especially in Bournemouth, it was like you were about to go into hospital for open heart surgery. It was like, oh no, what? You're doing a step 4. What? Are you all right? How is it? How are you feeling? How is that for you? And then there was like horror stories about how hard it was to share a step 5 and this. Oh, and I found out this about myself, and it was dreadful. There wasn't a single damn thing in my step 4 and 5 that I hadn't done and didn't already know. Get on that one. It was old news to me. What I got out of that, aside from the relief of sharing it with another man, is I got someone to sit in front of me at the end of it and clearly point out some screaming defects that I'd been running on for years. I could not believe it when he called me arrogant. Couldn't believe, how dare he? When he called me self-righteous. What? Couldn't believe it. And then he went away, and then he said, I want you to go home. I want you to take the book down from your shelf. Wasn't even on a shelf, but it said in the book, take it down from a shelf. I was tempted to put it on a shelf just so I could take it off, because the book said do that. Review where you'd got up to and ring me if there was anything that you'd missed out. And I just thought, you patronising. Ah! But I did it. And I went through that process. And I went through the process of 6 and 7 and got to the amends part. And my sponsor said to me, he said, Al, people that are close to you, your family, your ex-wife, your children, I want you to keep away from them for now. I want you to work a bit of the programme. I want you to get some grounding in your recovery, and then we'll look at making amends to these people. I went, all right, no problem, Carl, I'll do that, buddy, no problem. And immediately went behind his back, phoned up my children. They were then, I mean, they're in their late 20s now, but they were growing up then. Phoned them up, said, look, I'm clean. I've been clean for a little while now. I'd really like to see you. I'd really like to meet you. And they were like, all right, that's cool. I said, look, I'm not going to come to the house and meet you because my first wife wasn't very fond of me then. She's not very fond of me now, I don't think. But she was particularly unfond of me then. And I didn't want to upset her. And they said, all right, cool. A week before I was due to go up there, up by Gloucester, where they live, I phoned up and my first wife answered the phone. And she went, you tosser. And I was like, what? She said, you haven't changed one single bit, have you? And I was like, guys, I was legitimately, I didn't know what was going on. I was like, what do you mean? She said, not only are you coming up to see the boys, but you didn't even have the decency to tell me. You didn't even have the respect to do it in my house. You were sly and you were a lying, deceptive bastard again. And I don't want you anywhere near them. Over 13 years in recovery, I've still haven't seen my older boys. I haven't been able to see them face to face. I haven't been able to meet them. I haven't been able to talk to them. As a direct result of, in the inventory process, me going, I'm about to have a good idea. I'm going to sit, I'm sat down. I'm having a good idea. And the first thing that involves is not telling my sponsor. And that was such a lesson to me. That was such a lesson. So we go on working through the steps, and he gets me out there making amends, and he was very clear with his amends. He was like, if you've nicked someone's video, it was videos, and if you've nicked someone's video, I don't want you going back to say sorry for nicking your video unless you've got another damn video to give them. Just saying sorry is not making amends. And he was very clear about that. If you've stolen money for people, you need to be going back with the money or a plan to pay back the money. Just saying sorry doesn't fix it. If I kick that door in and I come back tomorrow and say, I'm sorry about kicking your door in, it doesn't mend it, it doesn't fix it. So I got into the amends process and I started going through that. And then it brought me to step 10. And he did this. He took me to the book. He took me to 84. He took me just past the promises. We discussed that the promises were happening in my life. And he took me to the book. And I'm sure you guys know this because it's a big book study. But this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes along the way. It goes on to say we have vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up our past. Now this was the important bit, because this was a real turning point in my life and in my recovery. We have, not we're gonna, not we might, not someday maybe, this is a very definite statement. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And that was that's not a wishy-washy statement or a wishy-washy promise. That's a very definite, Dobbo, be clear about this, kid. You've arrived. This is it. You're in it. Don't, move away from this notion of searching for something new or searching for that. Or studying this or studying that because there has to be something better. This is something better. And you're in it. And and I started to learn how to do that. I'd had a crash course, if you like, on inventory taking, on spotting defects. When you study the steps and you look at the way they're laid out, and the order they're laid out, and the kind of intricacies in the way it takes you to this point, it's absolute genius. I don't believe the book's mystical or particularly divine, but I believe that there was an influence in the writing of the book and what went into that, and the way it brought me to this point, because I couldn't take the inventory necessary at step 10 without going through the process of the first 9 steps. And you see it in people. I've seen it in people. I'd like to say I don't judge people, but that's bullshit. I judge everyone. And I've watched people in recovery who've kind of missed out key parts of the program and get to trying to look at their behaviour, trying to take inventory around step 10 and just can't do it. Just cannot see it. And I believe with all my heart, that's not because they're pig-headed, stubborn, arrogant, stupid, any of that. I believe it's because the process to get us there is in the working through the steps. I learned that there was there's a huge difference between step 10 and step 11, and it's easy to get complicated on this, because if you look at Bill's later writings on step 10 in the 12 and 12, so we all know about the 12 and 12. He wrote it because he wanted to get the 12 traditions out to the fellowship, and when he wrote it, it just wasn't thick enough. It was the kind of mindset Bill Wilson had is when the big book was originally published, it was about twice the thickness of that. It was called the big book because it was really thick. And the reason it was really thick is because they used really cheap paper, which was very, very thick, which made it a big book. And the reason it was made into a big book was because Bill's thinking was people are more likely to pay for a bigger book than they would for a little one. He was a salesman, and you know what? He was probably bloody right. But he still had this mindset when he wrote the 12 and 12. When he wrote the 12 and 12 to get the traditions into the fellowship, he thought, shit, just look, there's nothing to it. I need to pad it out. So he padded it out with essays on the steps, which are great. The step essays in the 12 and 12 are great, but they're not the directions or instructions on how to work the steps. They're just essays on experience from people who had. And step 10 in the 12 and 12 is a little bit different. And the practice of it's a little bit different. It talks about writing balance sheets and stuff like that. And it was made very clear to me that step 10 in the big book, I got no need to pick up a pen. That isn't what step 10's about. Step 10's about when I come in here and I make a comment that offends someone and I know about it. Step 10's about me turning round and fixing it then. Not waiting until I go home at 11 o'clock and writing him, arrogant bastard, how dare I? If I do something that offends someone and then, shame on me. If I then go, okay, I know I've done that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hold it for a while. I'm going to go home. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to pray on it for a little while. And then tomorrow I think I may come back and make amends. Absolute shame on me if I do that. And I was taught this. I was taught step 10 is alive. Step 10 is dependent on my current relationship with the God of my understanding in this moment, right now, right this second. So if I do something to offend someone, I'm putting it right straight away. Which then means when I'm doing a bit of writing perhaps, or I'm doing the late night stuff in step 11, hopefully I won't have too much crap to clear up because I've cleared it up in the day. And for me, when I'm on point, when I'm getting up in the morning, when I'm practicing my disciplines through the steps, when I'm having my quiet time with the big fella, when I drive into work and there's a certain spot on the road I drive into work that for years has been like a little prayer spot for me, if you like. I'll always turn the radio down and start chatting away to the big fella. I'm sure people drive past me and just think, he fucked up, he is. I don't know what's going on with that guy. There's something wrong with him. When I'm going through that process and somebody cuts in front of me at the end of the road and I go, burp, within seconds I'm going, sorry. Letting them out and going. When I'm not doing that, and that exact same incident's happening at the end of the road, by about 3:30 that afternoon, I'm still planning how I'm going to burn their house down in the middle of the night. See, step 10, the working and the reworking of step 10, ultimately is not about you guys. It never was. It's about me and my relationship with God. The working and reworking of step 10 correctly and effectively means that I'm not blocked off by resentment, by jealousy, by anger, by fear, by all of the things that cripple me if I'm not doing it. I don't have a favourite step. I think they all work together, but there are some of the steps, because they're really active, because they're constant, that I get more pleasure out of. And what I get to see in working the 10th step is I get to see God showing off. I get to see that ultimately, left to my own devices, that isn't me. I get to see that this program is so much more than just about drugs, than just about alcohol, than just about addiction. In the working of step 10, I get to see that this program gives me the ability, no matter how much of a dickhead I am, can be and will be, it gives me the ability to live with you guys. I learn it in here, and I get to take it to my family, I get to take it to my home, I get to take it to my work. And I get to stay an active member in the Fellowship of Cocaine Anonymous. It's the coolest thing in the world. For me. It's the greatest thing in the world. And it is absolutely not to be messed with. For me. The list of our brothers and sisters who have fallen by the side goes up and up, and continues to, and very recently continues to, with people that are close to us, with people that have made huge changes in the world and to the people around, and are not with us anymore. This is not to be messed with, man. It's truly not. I'm a very, very grateful member of Cocaine Anonymous. I have spent over 13 years working and reworking the steps of Cocaine Anonymous, and I have absolutely no intention of stopping that. It's cool to be here, and thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Alan. Lovely. Right, yeah, we're going to open the meeting for general sharing.